In this video, I'm going to walk through the Microsoft Learn Labs Secure Your Azure SQL Database. Now, in this lab, we're going to be talking about lots of different ways that you can help secure your database, both from a firewall standpoint, a user standpoint, and even a data standpoint. So it's a great way to be able to find out how you can help secure your data, even if you're not a very good or very knowledgeable with SQL databases. So let's go ahead and get started. Here in the introduction, it talks about the importance of data security, which at this point, I'm pretty sure you're probably all extremely sure of. For instance, there's specific information like phone numbers, addresses, and credit cards that need to be handled extra carefully, and therefore we want to make sure that our SQL database in Azure is able to handle that for us. So let's go ahead and set up our sandbox. So in this environment, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a couple of different things. We're going to be creating a database, a SQL database server, that we're going to be creating a couple of databases on, such as the Marketplace DB and AdventureWorks LT, or as a demo. Additionally, we're going to be creating a separate server called App Server. It's going to be a Linux virtual machine that we're going to be using to simulate our application itself. And that app server should have access to the database while other resources don't. And so we're going to be able to use that as an example of what should and should not be able to have access to the environment. Now that our shell is coming up, first thing we're going to do is create our, set up some variables. So I'm going to copy this. There's some things we need to edit here. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it into Notepad. And the few things I need to change are these guys in brackets right here, such as the admin login name, the password. The admin login, I'll just call it test admin. It's a very bad name. Don't use that name. And then for the password, password 01. Again, a very bad password. Do not use that password in anything that is going to last for more than 2 hours and only have publicly accessible data on it. So what this is going to do is it's going to create some variables. One called admin login, another one called password, another one called server name, which will be created with a random number at the end, the resource group, and then also the location for that resource group. So let's go ahead and copy and paste these. Paste and enter. And what it's done is it's just set up those variables. If I want to see, for instance, what my server name is, well, I can actually type in echo $server name, and then it returns back, well, you said you wanted it to be server with some sort of a random number at the end, and there we are, server 1651. All right, with those variables already set, now I can go ahead and run this command right here. If we read this from the right to the left, we're going to create a SQL server in Azure. We're going to name it that server name that we just looked at. We're going to put it into the resource group, $resource group, which we had just assigned right here. The location we're going to put it in is going to be the location we defined over here with the username and password that we defined as well. So copy and paste that, and that may take a minute or two for it to complete. When the server is done creating, we're then going to create a database called Marketplace DB. Looks like we're going to use the AdventureWorks LT as a template for that. And so we can see in the command here, we're going to create a SQL database in Azure. We're going to put that in our resource group on our server. We're going to call it Marketplace DB, and we're going to sample it from or copy it from the AdventureWorks with a basic configuration. So we're not paying a whole lot for it. All right, so our database was just created. Our SQL Server was created. Now let's create the database on it. And then lastly, we want to see a connection string. So we're going to be doing a show connection string for the SQL database, specifically for the SQL CMD client to connect it to the Marketplace DB on our server. So we'll copy that and paste it in. And as soon as the database is done installing, it will spit out the connection string for us. All right, so that took a few minutes for the database to get created. We then ran the connection string, and we see the output of that connection string is right here. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it back into my notepad over here. And before I go any further, I see these two items right here that are covered, surrounded by the brackets for both the username and the password. I'm going to replace those with the admin and password I've defined up there. So test admin and then password of password01. I believe I will be needing that here in just a few minutes, so I have it ready to go. All right, next step. Let's go copy and paste this while we talk about it. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a virtual machine. So we can see here, create VM in Azure. We're going to call it App Server. Specifically, it's going to be an Ubuntu virtual machine running Linux and of a size specifically standard DS2 v2. When it's done creating, it will also generate some SSH keys that allow me to log in without requiring a password. That will take a minute or two, and then we will see an output similar to this, which will include the IP address that we need to keep track of. All right, so that completed fairly quickly. I want to go ahead and copy this public IP address, and I'm going to save that to my notepad just so I don't lose it later. All right, so once the VM is successfully created, we want to connect to it via SSH. So I want to type in SSH and then replace the ends there with that IP address. So SSH 40.118.189.160, and it will confirm, and it will say, hey, this is the first time you've logged into this machine. Are you sure you trust it? I will say yes and enter. Now, let me in without using any username or password because of the fact that I used the SSH keys. That's great, not a problem. So now up to this point, what we've done is we've created a SQL server. We've created a database on that server, and we've created a virtual machine. If you've been doing a few labs here on the Microsoft Learn Labs, that's actually not that difficult at this point. Now what we want to do is we want to install some Microsoft tools on these Linux machines. So I'm going to copy and paste this in here. and let that run while we're talking about it. So let's see, the first thing it does is it sets up some path variables. Path variables, basically, if you are looking for a command on your computer, it looks through a specific set of folders. And so we're adding into it the opt MS SQL tools bin folder so that we can then find the Microsoft SQL tools on these machines. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and download a couple of files from Microsoft. One that specifically is a key that allows us to trust them. And then the second one is the actual package for the Microsoft tools. We'll then say go ahead and get an update on all of our catalogs, and then go ahead and install the Microsoft SQL tools along with a couple with the Unix ODBC dev features. So we can see in the right-hand window there, it is now installing those tools and setting them up. And as soon as that's done, we should be able to continue on. All right, at this point, right now, pretty much nobody has access to that database. It should be secured pretty heavily so that nobody can access it. And now we want to go in and we want to change that. Let's see. So we're already connected into the VM. That's great. We don't need to do anything there. Previously, we talked about using the SQL CMD command. Now I want to actually use it. We can see right here, yes, I am logged into my app server. So now I come back to Notepad, take my SQL CMD command, copy, and I paste that into my VM and enter, and I get an error. Now, if I read through this error briefly, I can see, yeah, okay, it gives me an ODBC error. Specifically, cannot open server with the server name, specifically because the client IP with this address is not allowed to access this server. So there's a firewall that's blocking me. It's not telling me that my username and password are incorrect. It's telling me specifically my firewall is blocking me. So that's what we want to change. Let's see, so it has me logging into the Azure portal to change this. Let's go ahead and check that out. Let me move this over to the side. So in the Azure portal, I want to go ahead and go to all of my resources, and I want to find my database. So let's see, I'm looking for, under type here, I'm looking for SQL Server. There we go. Last one on the list, SQL Server. I'll go ahead and select that. On the left-hand side, I'm looking for security. There we go, security firewalls. And then what I'm going to do here is that this checkbox right here, allow Azure to services resource access to the server. I'm going to say yes. Say yes, and then save to actually commit that change. So what that's doing is that's basically saying every single Azure resource that I might be using can access this database. So that means if I'm accessing it through the portal here, it should be able to access it. It also means if I'm accessing it through a virtual machine here, it should now be able to access it as well. So now if I just simply up arrow to get back to my SQL CMD command and hit enter, it should log me right in. And I can see my prompt has changed to a 1, which means I am now actively logged into the SQL database thanks to the firewall change. That's nice. Now I'm going to get out of this. I'm just going to type in exit to get out of the database and back to my virtual machine. So that was a server level firewall rule. Basically, we said everybody on this server can now be accessed from this IP address. The other alternative is to create a database level rule, which will just specify one specific database. And Apparently, yeah. So here's an example. Create SP set database firewall rule. You name it, and then you give it a range of IPs. So it wants us to do that this right here, but I have to edit in my own IP addresses. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this back into my notepad. And I'm going to copy and paste my Linux virtual machines IP in the from and to range. Notice I'm replacing the brackets at the same time. Copy. And with that being said, let's go ahead and I guess I need to go back into my SQL CMD and then right click and paste. You notice I have to manually type in go this time as opposed to having the paste work properly. The second line just does not paste in properly. All right, once it's done, type exit to disconnect from the database. It tells me to go back to firewalls and networking and turn that Azure services to off. So let's go ahead and do that. So Azure services, can set that to no. And then again, remember to click save. So if we think about what we did, originally we turned this to on, which allowed all of Azure to access this database server. We then went in and we said specifically, hey, this one database can be accessed by this IP address or a range of IP addresses. Once we did that, then we came in and we turned Azure services to off, which means all of Azure no longer can access that database. However, that one virtual machine should still be able to access it. And we can confirm this by rerunning that SQL command one more time. So I'll hit up arrow to get back to my SQL command and hit enter. The fact that I'm connecting means that I am now, in fact, accessing that database via the firewall rule that we created right up here. So I can't access the entire server, but at least I can access that one database. Let's see. Okay, database level rules. So it looks like it now wants me to delete that rule. Is that the same rule I just created? So I just created this allow app server database level rule, and now it's telling me go ahead and delete that rule using the SP delete database firewall rule. Well, let's try that. Paste and then go. All right. Type exit, and I'm pretty sure now, since I just deleted the rule that allowed me to have access to it, pretty sure now if I go ahead and try that SQL command again, it should deny me. It takes a second or two for those firewall rules to actually take effect. So we'll actually try that again later. Let's see, back in the portal, firewall rules, rule name of app server, start. So it wants me to set this up on the Azure portal instead. All right. Actually, let me move this over here so I can read it. So it wants me to select the firewalls and virtual networks rule name. Not sure what I just clicked. So if I scroll down here, I can now see that I have various rules. Currently, none are configured. So I can add in a new rule, allow app server, with a specific service IP address of 40.118.189.160, and again 40.118.189.160. Now, if this was a production environment that I had both on-premise and in the cloud, this range may include the entire range I have from my ISP to allow my internal business or my on-premise environment to be able to access our cloud environment. So let's go ahead and click Save. And then we come back to the Cloud Shell, try connecting to the database again, and it works flawlessly. Yay! All right, so exit. And then a server level virtual network rule. Well, let's go ahead and see it. Firewalls, networks, virtual. Down here under virtual networks. So maybe I have additional servers out in the cloud, and so I want to, or a specific internal network. So currently we're actually accessing this database using a public IP address. Maybe I want to start accessing that using a private IP address. Well, I can actually start setting that right down here with virtual networks. So let's see, add existing virtual network. So I'm going to go ahead and check add existing virtual network. For the name, I'll leave that name for right now. That's perfectly fine. Subscription, that's fine. Virtual network. Here is where I can specify the various virtual networks in my environment. Now currently I only have the one, and app server is on it, so I will choose that. And then the specific subnet on app server, on the app server VNet, is that one right there. So I'll go ahead and say enable. And it does actually warn me, hey, this may take up to 15 minutes, but that's fine. So what that's going to do, essentially, is it's going to add a new firewall rule, allowing anything from the 10.0.0.0 network that's in this app server VNet. So now instead of having to connect to the public IP address, I can now connect to the private IP. Let's see. So additionally, it also tells me, right, I created that. Again, it also additionally tells me to come back up to this allow app server rule and choose delete. Lastly, go ahead and click save. And I want to make sure I think that's correct. Let's try that one more time. That's looking better. Okay. Updating VNet rules. Perfect. And it looks good. There we are. There's our rule. Just had to refresh the page. All right, and now once that's done, we should be able to come back here to our machine and rerun the SQL command. And yes, hey, we're still connecting. So there's lots of different ways that we can set up these firewall rules. All right, next, now that we've created who or decided who can access it via IP address, now let's go ahead and control which users can access it. Specifically talking about authentication. So there's a couple of different authentication methods. We can use SQL authentication, which is built into SQL, as its name suggests. And then we can also use Azure Active Directory, which once we set up Azure Active Directory, we can easily just go ahead and grant permissions through the portal or through the CLI to define who has access to it. In practice, let's go ahead and let's create a user called application user. So I'm already connected, so I can go ahead and skip this first step. And I'm going to create a user called application user with a password called yourstrongpassword1. Let's go ahead and copy and paste. And then I do need to manually type go. And I can confirm that by the fact that this actually incremented to 2, which meant I had to actually type go. I then see it went back to 1. All right. Now that that's done, let's go ahead and change permissions for the application user we just created. Specifically, we want to add data reader and data writer. Now, I'm pretty sure this will only copy one line at a time. So if I copy and paste, yeah. So paste it in the DB data reader. Go ahead and copy the second line here. And then go. So we just granted reader writer permissions to our application user. And apparently we want to be a little bit more specific. We want to deny select to specific tables to our application user. So let's try that and go. All right. It then says, great, let's go ahead and drop our SQL connection, and then let's log back in using the user we just created. So exit, and I'm going to copy and paste this again back into my notepad. Right there's our first original SQL command. I'm going to go ahead and paste in our new command right below it. And we can see, yep, we've still got the marketplace DB. In this case, the application user and password. I guess I need to update that to secure password 1. Is that right? Your strong password 1. There we go. And I do need to change the server name because they have just NNNN. It needs to be whatever mine was up above. So 1651 in my case. All right, so we created this user. We granted some permissions. We restricted some permissions. And now if I go ahead and log in as that user, again, using SQL command in order to connect, it connects, which tells me I have the right username and password. And then go ahead and run a select from the sales LT customer. I'm pretty sure this one is going to fail. No, it worked. Just get back a listing of customers. Didn't we just restrict one? Select star from, oh, from the address. That's why. And we can see, yes, select permission was denied. That's kind of handy that they would tell us that. All right, and now into the fun stuff. Some of this was pretty interesting. If you've worked with SQL databases before, I wasn't too far out of the realm of the known. But now we're going to talk about how we can secure the data in transit and on disk. So the first is TLS encryption, or transport layer security. Allows us to encrypt the data going straight from the database. Specifically transparent data encryption, which I believe is enabled by default. Let's actually see. Sign into the Azure portal. Look for our marketplace DB. Let's go to all resources. Marketplace DB. Security tab on the left-hand side. And transparent data encryption right there. And we can see it is on by default, which means it uses that TLS encryption for all data being sent and received. For very few, only in very rare situations would you ever actually turn that off, and that would only be in the situations of older applications that cannot handle data encryption by default. Next option is what's called dynamic data masking. Remember, we talked about how this database may have customer data, such as phone numbers and credit card information. And so we want to configure that to be encrypted by default. Well, right here on our database, we can actually see under security right here, we have dynamic data masking. So we can go ahead and we can choose that And we can talk about adding a mask. So let's go ahead and add a mask. Sees, oh, that's kind of nice. Went ahead and found some interesting information, such as email addresses and phones that we may want to mask automatically. So let's go ahead and say add mask. Specifically, we are looking for the sales LT schema, the customer table. We want to look at the phone numbers. And then as far as the masking field, let's choose custom. Exposed prefix is 0. See XXX dash XXX dash, and then exposed suffix of 4. So what this means is it will start off and it will look through the phone column here, and it will not show us the first few letters, not show us any letters at the beginning. It will then show us these X's followed by the last 4 digits. Go ahead and say add. And let's do one more while we're at it. Let's do email addresses. So again, add sales LT, table is customer, column email, and then masking format, we can actually choose from an email format, which will show us just the first letter and .com or .edu at the end. And then lastly, add. All right, so with that set, let's go ahead and let's look back at our database. So we're back at our database as the application user, which we're currently logged in as. And we want to run this query to look through the customer data. Now, previously we ran a similar query and we got this information up here. So let's go ahead and run this one. And we will see it is not masked. Did I not click apply? I did not click save. Let's try that one more time. All right, so I ran the command and nothing was hidden. Let's go ahead and run that one more time. And now we see the email addresses are masked out. The phone numbers are masked out, but then other information such as first name and last name are not masked from us. That's awesome. Now we did that manually. There were some additional options that we could have just chosen as far as, yes, mask. We did that. We just did the email. We just did the phone. We could mask out usernames. We could mask out email addresses and cities and credit card numbers, and then save. And those add masks will automatically apply masks in the way that Microsoft feels was most appropriate. That may not be the best way to do it. For instance, the default value for the username may not be the best way to be able to show it, but that's what Microsoft is choosing. We could come back in and then later edit these. For instance, for the credit card, we could then specify, yes, we want specifically a credit card mask, update that, and then save it. All right. So that was data masking. Data encryption and data masking. Now let's monitor the database. So how do we monitor databases? Well, if we have a full-time DBA, hopefully they know. If we don't have a full-time DBA, we need to know. And Azure actually comes in really handy and helps us out with this. So we're going to go back to the portal and we're going to connect up to our server. So back to home. Yeah, sure. All resources, and we want to connect up to our server, which I think was the very last one. There we go. On the left-hand side, we're looking for security and we're looking for auditing. Now we can see SQL Azure Auditing or Azure SQL Auditing is disabled by default because it does require some additional features. So we're going to go ahead and turn that on. Then asks us where do we want to store that. We can store it into storage. We can store it into a logs analytics or the event hub. Let's go ahead and put that into storage, and let's configure that storage details. So what storage location do we want to put this? Let's go ahead and create new. We'll call this server 1651 auditing. It has to be lowercase apparently. There we go. LRS, I think that's right. Say OK. And so now all the event logs or auditing logs that are created by that database will now be stored in a log format on this storage account. Creating storage. All right. Oh. There we go. So now it's storing it there. At that point, we can then come back, and it wants us to go ahead and log in again as the application user, which we're currently logged in as, and then run a query again against the sales LT customer. And we see some data. And now back in the portal, we should be able to select our database and start looking at our auditing and view the auditing logs. You know what? I don't know if I actually saved that. We'll try that one more time. All right, one more time. So I ran my query, and now we come back into the auditing logs. Let's see. Under security, select auditing, and then select view auditing logs. That guy? No. All right, I'm not seeing it. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong place. I'm not supposed to be looking at the server. I'm supposed to be looking at the database. Marketing database. Auditing. There we go. View auditing logs. There we go. So here I can see, yes, in fact, a batch request was completed. A batch request, that is what a transact SQL command is referred to as a batch request, specifically against a marketplace DB on this server via a SQL CMD. Specifically, it was this user with this IP address that was requesting it. That's kind of nice. Oh, hey, more details about the actual statement. Nice. So we can actually look back and see what happened in the environment. Let's see, what else can we do here? Well, let's go ahead and look back at our SQL Server. And on the security tab again, let's look for advanced data security. It's not in there. All right, so it's telling me to look for something called advanced data security, but I'm not seeing it in here. Nope. I believe it's this Azure Defender for SQL. I think they've just renamed it. We can go ahead and turn that on. This is going to be doing a vulnerability assessment. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and just leave that. Periodic scans, we can have it run on a one-time basis or every single day or every single month. We can even tell it, yes, when you're done, go ahead and send an email to a specific user with a report. So let's see, can we go ahead and save that? Advanced threat protection types. So this will actually tell me what types of threats it protects against. All SQL injections, vulnerabilities, data exfiltration, unsafe, brute force logins, or anonymous client logins. So let's see, once the data is enabled, you'll be able to initiate the vulnerability scan. So let's go ahead and see if I can do that. Azure Defender's on. Yeah, so you could manually kick those off, or you can also have them emailed to you on a regular basis. Additionally, when we're talking about the data, we can also look back into the advanced data security, which was on the database, I believe. So if we look back in the Microsoft database, under the data security, it does a dynamic data discovery and classification. So we talked about having some credit card information there, some other PII. It's gone ahead and it said, hey, we found 15 columns with some possible security concerns. If we look at the classifications, does it tell me? It tells me suggested classifications, such as first name, last name, email, as well as their type of sensitivities, such as whether it's GDPR or other personal information. All right, there's more, but I think that's good for now. Basically, yeah, everything you could possibly want as far as security against your database. This works pretty well and takes it right off the bat for us. There we go. We've got a vulnerability assessment, so it can actually scan against our environment to look for known vulnerabilities. We've got our advanced threat protection, which will tell us if anybody's performing any SQL injection attacks against us. Yeah. Yeah, and give us some proactive alerting as far as any threats or concerns that might occur. So there you have it, securing our Azure SQL database against the world.